The first time my sister said it, I told myself I'd misheard. We were sitting at the long wooden table in her backyard, the one she'd bragged about importing, surrounded by tiny lights and matching cushions that made the whole place look like a restaurant ad. Her kids were already digging into red platters stacked with lobster tails, butter dripping down their wrists, laughing with mouths full. My son sat beside me, swinging his legs, staring a little too long at the food, trying not to make it obvious that he was hungry. I had brought a salad to share, the same way I always did, because I never wanted to show up empty-handed. She barely looked at it before sliding it to the far end of the table, like it was something she'd deal with later. When my son leaned toward the platters, just a small movement, nothing dramatic, she stood up, walked around the table, and placed a glass of water in front of him. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She told everyone, loud enough for the neighbors to hear over the music, that she didn't feed extras. It was just a joke, she said, one of those things people laugh at because they don't know what else to do. My cheeks burned as I tried to swallow the heat in my throat. My parents stared down at their plates. Her husband kept eating like nothing had happened. The cousins giggled, unsure if they were allowed to find it funny. I looked at my son's face, the way his shoulders stiffened as he wrapped both hands around that glass of water, nodding politely like he was grateful. He didn't ask for anything. He never does. He learned early that needing too much from people makes them uncomfortable. In that moment, something inside me cracked open, slow and painful, like a door I'd kept shut for years. I remembered every birthday where my sister made a big show of her kids' gifts while handing mine a card with no name on it. Every holiday where she reminded me how expensive everything was, how hard she worked, how some people should know their place. I forced a smile, thanked her for the water, and told myself I'd deal with it later. But as I watched my child sip from that glass while butter pooled on plates inches away, I realized later was already too late. I wasn't mishearing anything anymore. I wasn't imagining the lines she kept drawing between her family and mine. I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, pretending I was fine, knowing with a calm that surprised me that this time I wouldn't let it pass. I spent the rest of the evening observing quietly, letting everything settle in my mind. Her backyard looked perfect, lights twinkling in careful symmetry, the fire pit crackling just right, but I couldn't focus on any of it. All I could see were the choices she made, the way she treated my son like he was invisible, like he didn't even belong in the same space. It wasn't just the lobster. It was the calculated gestures, the subtle dismissals that built up over years. I remembered the family gatherings I'd attended as a child, always feeling like I was a guest in my own home, the laughter of cousins echoing over my attempts to participate. I thought I had grown past it, had convinced myself that family dynamics were complicated, that people sometimes acted selfishly without meaning harm. But this was different. There was intention behind it. I could feel it in her smile, in the way she served her children first, in the way she measured my son's portion to nothingness. I started noticing other things, the way she had whispered to her husband, exchanging smirks, the way her eldest son made eye contact with mine, almost testing him, seeing how he'd react. It wasn't cruelty born of accident. It was a performance, and I had been an unwilling audience. I had always been told to be grateful for family, to let go of grievances, to smile and nod. But as I watched my son push the glass away after drinking half, refusing to beg or whine, a storm of anger mixed with sorrow rose inside me. I remembered the nights I had sat by his crib, thinking about how I would protect him from exactly this kind of treatment, protect him from being less, from being treated like an afterthought. By the end of the evening, I had cataloged every insult, every snide remark, every cold glance, every instance where my sister's family had subtly reminded mine of our place. And I realized I had been silent for too long. I had wanted peace, wanted harmony, wanted to avoid conflict at all costs. But peace at the expense of my child's dignity was no peace at all. It was time to act, time to take control in a way that couldn't be ignored. The next day, I started planning quietly. I didn't announce anything. I didn't need witnesses yet. I revisited old family events in my mind, noting patterns, weaknesses, points where I could assert myself. I called vendors I had known for years, quietly securing things I knew would matter to her family. Invitations, reservations, gestures that would subtly shift the power balance. I talked to mutual friends and cousins, gathering insight into her habits, what she valued most, what she feared losing. Every detail mattered. I kept my son close, of course, explaining to him gently that sometimes adults made unfair choices, and sometimes you had to find ways to respond without losing yourself. Then I discovered the final piece, the detail that made everything click: her pride. She was obsessed with appearances, with showing the world that her family was perfect, that they were deserving of the best, while anyone else, even her own relatives, were expendable. That arrogance was my leverage. It was the moment I realized my response didn't have to be loud or confrontational. It had to be precise, undeniable, something that would leave no room for denial, something that would protect my son and make the imbalance clear to everyone. The plan took shape slowly, like a wave building out of sight before crashing against the shore. I waited for the perfect moment, letting her think she had control, letting the tension simmer in the background. She didn't notice that every choice, every small slight she had committed, was being stored in my mind, cataloged, and measured. The moment would come when I could reveal everything, not just as revenge, but as a statement. My son deserved better, and I would no longer accept anything less. The quiet observation had shifted into determination, and I knew by the time the right day arrived, nothing she could say or do would diminish the truth I was about to unveil. The day I decided to act, everything fell into place effortlessly. I invited her family over under the guise of a casual lunch, making sure everything she prized, her table settings, her curated backyard, her carefully selected menu, was present. I brought my son, smiling as he carried a small covered dish. The twist was subtle, almost invisible until the moment she realized it. I had coordinated with a local chef, one of the few who could perfectly replicate lobster and luxury dishes, and prepared an extra setting. My son's plate identical to her children's, steaming and golden, every detail flawless. As she handed my son water again, expecting the same ritual, I calmly lifted the cover. Her expression froze. The room, the table, the lights, all her theatrics, meant nothing against the sight of her children staring in disbelief as my son's plate was set before him, identical to theirs. I narrated quietly, recounting the many times he had been treated as an extra, overlooked, minimized, and yet here he was no longer invisible. I described every instance of her dismissiveness, her calculated gestures, and how each had been noted, remembered, and finally confronted, not with anger, but with undeniable truth. Her husband's jaw tightened. Her kids stared silently, unable to process the reversal, and my parents' eyes shimmered with both pride and relief. I watched my son take the first bite, calm and dignified, and felt a surge of satisfaction that wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition, justice, and finally, peace. She couldn't argue. She couldn't hide behind excuses. The act, small yet powerful, spoke louder than years of words. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever make my son feel like an extra again. The imbalance was corrected, the lesson clear, and for the first time in years, I felt truly, quietly victorious.